Welcome back to the Rum Ration podcast. Today we're talking about August 19th, 1942. And for most Canadians, Dieppe, if they even know what it is just a name on a cenotaph. But for me, it's a bit more personal. Growing up as an officer in the RMR, I became quite close to a man from a signals regiment named David Hart. And to the world, he was a hero, but to me, he was also not just a hero, but a mentor who later showed me what it meant to be an effective honorary colonel, a role he fulfilled for his beloved signals regiment in Montreal for close to 50 years. Actually, might have been more than 50 years. And as we get into the telling of the disaster that was the Dieppe raid, we're going to get into his story specifically later on in this episode.
And it's an honor to have Julien Lehoux here from Je me souviens program back once again. He was a guest previously on episodes 32 and 33, so do check those out to get an idea of what we talked about then. And he's going to help us navigate the story. Welcome back, Julien. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe there is a tear in your eye.
I'm just like refraining myself from crying, from breaking down. I'm kind of having a panic attack right now. I'm just like so overwhelmed with emotion and everything. But thank you very much for welcoming me again for this episode.
That's my fault for putting a little sarcasm in the script, and you guys actually went with it. Okay, all right, I'm sorry. That's right, folks. Joining us today is a man who has done the heavy lifting to ensure that the human stories of our military history don't just stay buried in old rucksacks or dusty archives. Julien Lehoux is a Quebec coordinator of the Je me souviens program at Canada Company, which is an organization that serves as a vital bridge between Canada's military and the public. Now, Julien is a trained historian and museologist. His expertise is centered exactly where we here at the Rum Ration podcast like to focus, which is on the lived experience of the ordinary soldier, sailor, and airman, because we're pretty ordinary. He specializes in Canadian participation in the Second World War, specifically the realities of imprisonment and internment, which we talked about in our episode on Hong Kong. And spoiler alert, not a fun vacation destination.
No, not at all.
No. He is the lead researcher and content manager behind Courage in Chaos exhibition, which is what we use exclusively to get our information for this episode and our background research. And he has been instrumental in deconstructing the myths and honoring the grit of the Dieppe raid. Now, beyond his work with veterans history, he also co-produces his own history show, Tous les chemins mènent à Montréal. Julien, given our own personal Je me souviens connection, we've known each other for what, 5, 6 years now?
5 years now, I think.
Yeah, 5 years.
Right.
Goodness gracious. It's a true honor to have you back here with us to help us walk through these bloody seconds of 1942. Welcome back to the Rum Ration podcast.
Well, as I mentioned, I'm very honored to be back here again, so thank you very much. And also the glowing introduction. Also, I'm kind of a bit overwhelmed. But again, don't thank you very much.
Should we call 911?
We should.
Yeah, please. Yeah, just like
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll finish the podcast as soon as they come here.
Well, Julien, let's jump into our time-traveling rum ration jar and go back to 1942 to set the stage. So we're talking about Dieppe. It's early 1942. The world is on fire. Things are not going particularly great for the Allies, if I can say that with a straight face. But the Canadians were in Britain, just sitting, doing nothing. What was the mental state of the troops? I mean, they see everything that's happening. There's stuff going on. They don't see any actual progress. So it must have affected them mentally, right?
Exactly. Honestly, like the state of their mind at this time was just like not that great. As you mentioned, 1942 was a turning point in the war, but not for the better. Well, depending on the perspective, but for our own, not for the better. Yeah. The Axis had the Allies pretty much in a stronghold pretty much all over the world. So in Europe, let's say that Germany was quite busy in Russia. France was occupied since 1940. The Balkans, Scandinavian regions were also occupied during that period. And at the same time, Germany was also able to put a pressure on Britain with the Blitz, which is pretty much well known. But for those who don't know, it's pretty much like this big aerial campaign on Great Britain from the German army, the German aviation.
Strategic bombing. We do have an episode on that too.
We do.
There we go. Just check that out.
Yeah.
And that's not what I'll mention. That's what I'll mention, like pretty much what was going on elsewhere in the world. So in Asia, Japan was the strongest. The United States, yes, they were like waging war against the United States, but still at this moment, their army and their navy was pretty much like very still in play. In Africa and the Middle East, the Western nations were trying to reconquer much of their colonies, and while at the same time fighting back against the Allies, not the Allies, I'm sorry, the Axis forces. And that's without mentioning what was going on with the North African campaign, which was still pretty much ongoing. So, to recapitulate, if we're strictly speaking about the European theaters and among the main allied powers, Britain, France, the United States, and USSR, while Britain was stuck on its island, France was out. French people are going to say otherwise, but honestly, between us three, they were out. The USSR was quite busy in Stalingrad. The war hasn't been quite overturned on their favor at this point, and the United States was more preoccupied with what was going on with Japan than what was going on in Europe.
And Julien, you mentioned Stalingrad. I'm sure some listeners are going to say, "Well, Stalingrad was a huge punch in the eye for the Germans, wasn't it? I mean, weren't things starting to turn around?" But at this point, nobody actually felt any effects of that, right? I mean, nobody knew.
No, exactly. Like
It was
I
just
don't know.
shaping. Yeah.
No,
August
exactly.
1942 was just starting.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm not quite sure of the timeline with Stalingrad when exactly it turned around and how they affect the rest of the war. But like, if things were starting to get around, the rest of the world didn't see it quite. Yeah.
August 1942, Stalingrad. It was just shaping towards
Just starting, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So
It was certainly no indication that it was not going to be a victory for the Germans at that point. I mean, they were pretty much overextended, but they've been doing that for a long time.
Yeah,
It's working for them.
And they almost took the city by that point. They were well on track, weren't they?
That's
So
right. Yeah.
Nobody knew what was going to happen. Yeah.
And I mean, you mentioned the Americans. They'd only been in the war now for 9 months.
Exactly.
9 months,
like I said, they were just like going back, like reworking the army, just like building back their army and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If they were starting to mobilize troops again in Europe, they were not like eager to go directly to fighting right at this moment in Europe, at least.
So it's safe to say if you're a Canadian serviceman sitting in the UK, you don't have a ton of reasons to be that optimistic.
No, not exactly. And also, like, it was for the Canadian troops, like they were in garrison in Britain for like 2 years at this point.
Yeah.
And things were as bored as frustrating. They were bored because they were pretty much not doing anything. Like, they will be training, they will perform like menial tasks and stuff like that. But in terms of fighting, they wouldn't do anything.
It was almost 3 years for some troops. Like the first division went over in December. Like the RMR was there since December 1939. So I think that's almost 3 years they've been there. Yeah.
Well, thank God for the weather.
And the amazing British cuisine.
Yes. No Gordon Ramsay in those days.
Yeah, and that's also mentioned frustrating because, like, they will be like witnessing the Blitz. They will be witnessing the German attacks, and they felt like they couldn't do anything to fight back. Yeah. And the best that they could do is like occasionally they will help, like the British civilians, like during like during like camping strikes and stuff like that. But like in terms of actually fighting back, they couldn't do so. And I think
in the episode we did on strategic bombing, I think Rejoy dug up the part about the RMR history claimed that it shot down an aircraft, and so, we did our part. We did our part.
Well,
as always, the regiment stands firm.
I don't think that's really much better than what I assume some of them could do. Like, and not because they couldn't try, but they wouldn't try. I mean, but yeah, and also one thing that is important thing to mention is that these troops these Canadian troops that were in Britain at this time, they were among the first to enlist in the Canadian Army. So they were like the most. I will assume they were the most eager to fight, to do their part. So being basically blocked for 3 years, 2 to 3 years, like not to do anything, like I just cannot imagine how they could feel at this moment. But this wasn't like for like a trying. So like in 1940, the British Army founded the British government founded the Common Operation Headquarters to conduct various terror operations against the Axis. So the aim of it was to just basically conduct different raids on German position in France, in Norway, and different other positions in Europe, just basically to disrupt them, also gather intels, and also basically it kind of works for the media and propaganda, stuff like that. Also, I just as an aside, while searching for this episode, I just learned that the COHQ was also responsible for conducting the Project Habakkuk, which I think you guys made an episode recently, right?
We did.
You did. That's right.
Project
Episode
Jubilee,
56.
the ice ship something.
Yes.
This
Yes,
thing-
turning the ice carriers, shall we call them?
Yeah. So you check out their project and it's like a list of raids conducted in Norway and French, and then Project Habakkuk, and then just another list of raids. It's like, okay, I guess somebody has a passion project of some kind.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, basically all these raids were like very much smaller in scope compared to Dieppe. Like I said, they were mostly just like terror operation, just to gather intel or just like to fill like a very specific objective. So in 1942, the COHQ came under the leadership of Lord Louis Mountbatten, who really wanted to organize this very big operation to basically show to the British people, but also to its allies, mainly the USSR, that Britain was pretty much still in play in terms of fighting. So the idea of the Dieppe raid came from that. Came from the idea of we're going to, like in French, we call this a coup d'éclat, like a very a showy assault, basically. Just basically go in there, fuck shit up, show you're still fighting, and then withdraw. So that was basically like the very gist of it for the Dieppe raid.
Like a show of force.
A flex
Exactly.
in modern terms, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Bit of a flex.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. Because, like, as former soldiers ourselves, Rejoy and I both know that inaction rots the soul, right? The troops, you want to keep them busy.
Oh, yes.
Because if you don't, it leads to indiscipline if it's not dealt with carefully. And back in the early 1940s, before Dieppe, you can see it from the letters home, right? From the soldiers, that the feeling of being left out of the fight.
Yeah.
Honestly, you described it perfectly. Just feeling like you're just being left out of the fight. I've read letters from like Quebecois soldiers at the time who were like mobilized in Great Britain, and just how absolutely bored they were. I think like one of them, like I think it was the father of Pierre Venna, who was like a Quebec historian who wrote a lot about the Dieppe raid. His father was part of the Dieppe raid and unfortunately got killed during the operation. So his son like wrote a lot of transcribe a lot of his letters for books. And basically, like the letters that he will write, he will write to his wife, and all of them were basically just, "I'm so bored. I will go to meetings. I will do this training that we have to do every day, and then I will just be in my room and not do anything, just go to sleep because there's nothing to do." So they will be so bored. And
endless inspections, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, to note for our listeners, particularly those who think of the military or the army as a profession, as a job. So who cares if you're doing it in the UK or you're doing it back at home? You're still getting paid. No, these guys are all volunteers. They all joined to fight. They didn't join to do show parade and inspections and move around and endless route marches every single day. I can see why they get frustrated.
Yeah, and also like I said, it's more so like when each time they will receive any news from the war, from like any part of the world, like from the North African campaign, or from like Russia, or from like Asia, or whatever, they are just for the Blitz. They will just feel like, why are we fighting? Why aren't we there fighting as well?
Yeah.
They will just be, and they didn't feel like. Obviously, there was like a reason why they were still fighting in terms of like politicals and like
So you got a bunch of bored, frustrated Canadians who want to get in the fight.
Yeah.
You've got Louis Mountbatten, who's like, hey, I want to do a massive flex and show the Germans that we're still in this. And more importantly, to kind of reassure the Russians and the USSR that we're doing something. So we're going to do a raid. And so for the non-military listeners out there, Julien, what's the difference between a raid and a full-scale landing like we saw later on in Normandy? In the eyes of the planners, what's the difference?
Yeah, well, that's a great question because I feel like there's a lot of confusion between the two of them, and I think that's why Dieppe got kind of muddled. I think after it happened. So, but I will say the main difference is the intention. So a full-scale landing, like we saw in D-Day, but also what we saw in Sicily, in Italy, is that a full-scale landing and invasion is basically launching a bridgehead in terms of a larger assault. So you just land your troops, you form a bridgehead, you land all your stuff. And then afterward, you just prepare for a larger invasion of this territory. So France or Italy or Sicily and stuff like that. A raid works under different objective. Its objective is basically to just reach a position, do as much damage as possible, and then withdraw as quickly as possible. So in that regard, the Dieppe raid was never meant as a complete invasion of French. Basically, the Dieppe raid was just to experiment in terms of maybe a potential full-scale full-scale invasion. But at the time, it was mostly, like I said, it was an experimentation for this large-scale assault. But this was not the large-scale assault. It was just like a trial, let's say. So Dieppe, they were just like, let's go to Dieppe. Let's gather intels about German defense and German position and their constitution of their troops and so on and so forth. Let's capture POWs and let's do also as much as damage as possible in terms of the defense and then leave before reinforcement arrive.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to say, so in terms of like the actual battlefield, in terms of how the actual battle was actually carried out, there's not much difference in terms of them. In both cases, landing ships will arrive on the beach, troops will land, they will fight, and then they will withdraw. Well, for the raid, they will withdraw. It's really, the difference is really in terms of like planification, in terms of the overall objectives of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say. It's basically the objectives, right? Landing, you're there to stay, hopefully. A raid, it's in and out.
Yeah,
exactly. Honestly, you just explained it way better than I did, in far lesser words.
No, but you set it up beautifully. I just wanted to make sure I got the gist of it. So now, when it came to Dieppe, the leadership defines the preparation, right?
Yeah.
And we see Lieutenant Colonel Dollard Ménard taking over the Fusiliers Mont-Royal just 4 months before the raid. So that's pretty soon in terms of taking over command of a regiment and then going into action with that regiment. So and that happened on April 1st, 1942, and he replaced Lieutenant Colonel Paul Grenier. Now, Ménard was only 29 years old and was described at the time as the youngest battalion commander in the Commonwealth. In the Commonwealth.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's something, isn't it?
Yeah, Julien, Ménard was an RMC grad, and it's the 150th anniversary of the Royal Military College. I think we're going to try and do an episode on that later on this year. But he was a career officer with the Vendus, the Royal 22nd Regiment, who had combat experience. He had previously in India, where he'd served on attachment to the Indian Army in the Northwest Frontier region. That's pretty impressive. Including the Waziristan campaign. I bet you if you got that in a pub quiz, name the Canadian officer who fought in India. There probably wouldn't be that many Canadians walking around with Indian campaign medals on their chest.
No.
But his assignments there, gave him some real world experience, right? He had exposed him to infantry, cavalry, light tanks, and mountain warfare, meaning that unlike pretty much any Canadian officers of his age, he already had experienced some real operations involving ambushes, patrols, and irregular fighting, which are all part of, going into a raid. So how did he change the culture of his unit to get them combat ready so quickly?
Well, he basically brought discipline back to his unit. So in comparison to his fellow officers, as you guys mentioned, Ménard was young, he was motivated, and also had combat experience that was not from the First World War.
Right.
His combat experience was much more recent in comparison. I also personally suspect that he might have a bit of a chip on his shoulder. In terms of like...
Oh, no.
Possible, yeah. Well, Ménard was a Quebec nationalist. That's... He told about this pretty extensively during the referendum in 1980. But he was a Quebec nationalist. He was also put in charge of one of the few French-speaking regiments in the Canadian Army at the time. Okay. And I suspect at least that he wanted to prove to his Anglophone colleagues that Quebecois soldiers were just as competent and good as their Anglophone colleagues at least.
Right.
So, as you two again mentioned, Ménard, the official prior to Ménard was Paul Grenier, to represent exactly what I said. He was older, he was a veteran, but from the First World War. And while reading from the book from the FMR history book, Grenier seems to be really well appreciated during the interwar periods. He seems to be very experienced in terms of like how he led the regiment during the civilian years, the peace years, and all of this stuff. But it seems like when the Second World War came in, he was kind of a bit over his head.
Yeah.
I'm not criticizing him in general, but I think just different officers for different situations.
Oh, absolutely. Right? And this was the time period this was happening. Like, the British Army, and particularly when Monty came back from Africa, you saw a big cleaning out of all the World War I era guys, including our own beloved C.B. Price, General Price from the RMR.
Yeah. So Grenier, when he would reach Britain with his troops, he will just perform the same training every day, which kind of worked at the beginning, but after 2 or 3 years, soldiers would just get out of it. You know, they will
Yeah.
just not be, they will not be as motivated as two to 3 years prior. And from what I read, it didn't seem like it was doing much in terms of like trying to quench their boredom or just quench their frustration or just like address these issues in terms of morale. They would just do what he knew best, doing the same thing again and again and again. So I don't think this was really the best situation possible for their troops, or for his troops. So when Ménard came in, he just basically drastically changed how to manage a regiment day to day. So one of the first things that he did was notably emptying the quartermaster reserve with the extent of the minimum bare necessities in terms of guns and ammunition. Everything that he saw is excess, he will just lay it on the tarp outside. It will say to his guys, take whatever you want and get acclimated with it. So
that must have probably hospitalized the quartermaster sergeant.
Yes.
I mean, that's shocking because the whole point of having a quartermaster is not,
not to give out anything.
Not to give out anything.
No, but it felt like for them, it seemed like it was like Christmas. Like they got crazy.
Of course.
Yes. Yes. I remember how many times going down there to say, well, I'm missing a boot. Oh, learn to walk with barefoot then, sir.
Sounds like a personal problem, sir.
All different times, huh?
Some things never change.
Yeah. So he also raised the training for like 100%. So, and notably installed the battle drill. So battle drill was his own concoction, was his own invention based on his own combat experience. So the details are lost on me in terms of what they will entail, but basically it will just like be simulation of battles with live ammunitions, with like special exercise, special training and stuff like that. Yeah, no, it really, we were talking about injuries. I'm sure there was a few of them that happened, maybe 10.
Guaranteed.
Yeah. Yeah. And when Ménard came in, like in April, like very soon after, they learned that the FMR would be part of the Dieppe raid. Like the Dieppe raid.
Right.
At the time was like the Operation Jubilee, not Operation Jubilee, but at the time they knew this would be coming on. So Ménard will drag his soldiers like to the beaches in Britain. They will just like, well, let's just simulate a battle on a beach. Like this is going to be the training for the day, Yeah. So honestly, like his objective was to make his soldiers as combat ready as soon as possible. Like make it so that they know their equipment, their weapons, their environment, then the field of battles as soon as possible.
But what was going on with the FMR, it was not necessarily unique to the Canadian forces in Britain, right? I mean, at the same time, read about in Farley Mowat in his brilliant book, The Regiment, talks about the same sort of thing when they got back to Britain in 1940, just overhauling the entire NCO staff and the officers, replacing the old salts with new blood, fresh blood, guys who are eager to fight, training standards change. So Ménard was very much in the mode of the time of this revamp of the Canadian forces, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a soldier, Jacques Nadeau, and we've all been that soldier. A certain private in the FMR who describes standing in front of a pile of ammo and grenades under a tarp, told to help yourself. It sounds great until you actually have to swim with it.
Yeah, and there's a story with Jacques Nadeau because also like before the Dieppe, like, or we're just going a little bit out of ourselves, but like before the raid, he was tasked with being like in French we call it like an estafette, like a recon. Basically, he was given a bike, a bicycle,
runner.
A runner. Okay, thank you. Yeah, runner. Yeah. So he was basically given a bicycle and was like, learn to ride this bicycle, and during the Dieppe raid, you're going to be like a runner. But like, Nadeau was, by his own admission, was quite small, like 5'4", 5'3".
That's a good size runner. You don't want, less of a target.
But like on a
smaller target, the better. Yeah,
on a bicycle,
we've replaced runners with things called radios. Basically, that carry messages.
He told like in his book, and I found it both like funny, like in a very black comedy kind of way, like in a very dark way, but pretty funny, but like also like horrifying. He was trapped with his bicycle that was too big for him, landing on the beach of Dieppe, and like guns and like bullets flying, and just like tossed the bicycle on the water, saw the bike, and basically sunk down. It was like, well, screw this, I'm just gonna
was it a floating bike?
So yeah, no, I mean, just, like I said, just going a bit ahead of myself, but yeah, they were like strapped down for the raid with everything imaginable. They were just like fully prepared. I think like in the same when Nadeau talks about like this specific anecdotes, like he might be exaggerating. To be fair, he might be exaggerating, but I think it really shows how the soldiers were very eager and motivated to fight. But he mentioned like one guy grab a mortar bomb and just had it with him and be like, "Yeah, I'm going to use this mortar bomb during the raid." Like, what a mortar? I'm not sure. I don't know how you're going to do that, but like, go ahead, buddy. And
ideally, you give it to the guys with the mortar.
Yes.
yeah, well, you know, I think
you don't throw it at the Germans.
No.
no, ideally, unless they're like very strong, but like
very, very strong.
Very, very strong, right? But yeah, no, like, and you know, and that's what I mentioned. Like they had the May West, like, you know, the May West, like basically these life jackets, like for the soldiers. So they were like very, very well equipped, very, very eager to fight. I'm just like repeating myself, but like, yeah, this was the mood at the time for the FMR.
So one of the things that I think many of the reels and histories show are the landing craft, all the troops on the landing craft pulling up to the beaches, the ramps going down. Everyone talks about the training beforehand. They talk about what happens and then getting back. No one talks about the landing craft because there's a certain amount of training that goes on to understand how to board and disembark from landing craft, right? I mean, that it's not intuitive. So can you and you know and Hollywood and all the various movies, they tend to conveniently skip over this part of it. And I feel kind of bad for the guys who are, you know, piloting the landing craft. Like, hey, how come I only got that 2.5-second cameo in you're Saving Private Ryan? Because those things got blown up rather regularly too. Can you talk a little bit more about their role?
Yeah. So for the Canadian soldiers, the landing craft, they from what I knew like there's like two types of landing craft that you will use, like the LC and the LCT, landing craft assault and landing craft tanks. Landing craft assault for the infantry, landing craft tanks for the tanks.
The infantry ones were they also termed LCI as well? Was there, or am I mixing that up? Or was it just LCA?
I think it's just the LCA, but you might know better than me on that one. Also, I'm really not sure.
Maybe I misread it, but please,
Let's pause recording for like 2 minutes and just like Google it real quick.
Or not.
No, let's not. But yeah, so the Dieppe raid was like their first occasion for the Canadian Army like to use these ships and to be really acclimated with themselves and acclimating themselves with these ships. I know like when Ménard or like the other Canadian regiment were training for the Dieppe raid, the ship were not necessarily available for them right away because, you know, they would be like manned by the Navy and, you know, just logistical reason for that. Yeah. But they were mostly like, they had a chance to be acclimated with them during the Yukon exercise, which I think were carried out, I think it was in May. Might have been in May. I'm not sure though. Maybe June. Maybe I should have researched this subject further before talking about it, huh? Maybe I should have, right? But yeah, so they had to do these two exercises, named the Yukon exercise. And this is where the soldiers will learn how to embark and disembark these ships. What was the constitution, like how many they could fit in there, like pretty much all of these intricate details surrounding these ships. And also how to embark before the raid, but also after the raid was done, basically, like just during retreat and stuff like that. Yes. All these operational, all these exercises. This is when they will learn about these ships. And it was also in terms of training, it's also a moment where like the Navy and the infantry could like really work to learn to work together and to really coordinate themselves together. Again, I don't want to go ahead of myself, but one of the major flaws with the raid was how much the different branch of the army didn't really spoke with one another. The Navy knew what they were supposed to do. The Air Force knew what they were supposed to do, and the infantry knew what they were supposed to do. But they would barely talk to one another to barely coordinate their stuff. So the Yukon exercise in that regard gave this small opportunity for the soldiers on the battlefield to actually talk to one another and like, you know, cooperate with one another. But that's it. That was it. Yeah.
So I think we've got like two major things which differentiate this whole episode from what happened previously in the past in the First World War. You've got that whole idea of the Army and the Navy working together in combined assault, which is this is the in its complete infancy. It's beginning to form, and secondly, I mean, you talk about or you see the soldiers getting off landing craft after you conduct the raid. and you hopefully achieve your objectives. You got your POWs, you've got your wounded as well. You have to get back on those landing craft. It's not just a mob of men. I mean, there's a disciplinary structure. So training for that is also very important. And also very new, I would imagine. Now, Julien, can you give us some sort of insight as to how the soldiers actually felt when they were finally told that, hey, guess what? We have a mission for you.
They were so ecstatic. Honestly, they were so excited. And for them also, like when they were training for the raid, the soldiers were not stupid. Like Ménard knew that the raid was coming, but like the soldiers were not necessarily like to prevent any leaks. They were not personally told like what was going to happen. But they knew like something was coming out when they will go to, I think it was the Isle of Wight, where they will like carry on the Yukon exercise and all the other exercise for the raid. So they knew something was coming out, and when it got announced, when it was officialized that they will be actually going to France and carry this first big strike in Western Europe, they were so excited. They were so excited, ecstatic. Yeah.
They're finally getting into the action, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All that whining and complaining, and here we go. Careful what you wish for.
Well, yeah. They didn't know where they were coming, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right. Before we sail towards a beach that nobody has properly examined, this episode is most definitely not brought to you by May West Overproof Rum, the naval strength spirit for soldiers whose kit list treats buoyancy as an optional extra.
Bottled at 80 proof and served in an inflatable yellow jacket, May West Overproof promises to keep your spirits afloat, even when the rest of your equipment is dragging you to the bottom of the channel.
Pairs beautifully with cigarettes, chocolate, several hundred rounds of ammunition, and the reassuring instruction to simply help yourself to as many grenades as you'd like.
May West Overproof Rum, because mobility is important right up until somebody lays out the ammunition target. So, Julien, now the guys are trained. They're loaded with gear, but they were sailing toward a beach that they really didn't understand or know anything about. So, hey, what went wrong?
Everything went wrong. Like to make it very simple, even the best planification cannot overcome overwhelming odds against you. And unfortunately for the soldiers sent to Dieppe, they weren't favored by the best planification to begin with.
So this is a part that kind of hurts to read as an officer, right?
Yes, it does.
Maybe the planning might not have been top notch, and that's pretty much the main job of an officer, plan and lead. The intelligence failures were systemic. Julien, can you walk us through why the geography of Dieppe was basically a death trap for the Calgary Regiment's tanks?
The Pebble Beach. That's all I gotta say. The Pebble Beach. It seems like such minor details, but with consequences that were very important and really exemplify how the planification for the raid was completely deficient. So the COHQ thought that the beach of Dieppe had sand and did all of the planning on this assumption. So all the exercise were carried out on sand beaches in Britain. The soldiers got used to moving on sand beaches. The vehicles were prepared for sand beaches. But the Dieppe beach is actually charted. It's actually filled with pebbles. And just
to clarify, I've been there a couple times. They're not pebbles what you'd think of, like little tiny little pieces of gravel. They're the smallest ones are about the size of your fist, and the bigger ones can be the size of your head. They're big rocks.
So pebble is a bit of a misnomer then.
Yeah. I mean, depending on where. I mean, certain parts the pebbles are smaller, but there are big rocks, big round rocks. I don't know if that's why they call them pebbles, because they've been washed with the tide, right? Yeah.
It's a rocky beach, essentially.
Very rocky.
Yeah. And this pretty much changes everything for this movement, because like the soldiers were used to walk on beaches, sand beaches. So for them, it was like this initial surprise of like, this is not what I was told this was going to happen. But also more importantly, I feel like the tanks were completely immobilized and their trucks couldn't move. So as soon as they will like land on the beach from the LCT, they were just basically stuck there, and they were just they couldn't do anything. I don't think they could even probably position themselves like to actually fire back at the Germans. So they would just be obstacle even for the soldiers, or just cover
from fire.
And also when you think about all the training, you're training on sand, and now you're on basically a rocky shore. So movement is also different and difficult because you're weighed down with all that gear. And Colin, as former soldier, you know that the terrain affects how you move.
Sure does.
And, wherever you are. So all of a sudden, you're on this rocky, it's easy to turn an ankle. You can't really run.
Yeah.
It's slippery.
Yeah.
All these things that you've not expected. And now you're stuck.
Yeah.
And no armor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the Pebble Beach didn't cause their defeat. It was just like one of numerous factors that really didn't help a battle that was already lost in advance, unfortunately. One other numerous factor that contributed was the sunlight, actually. I think his name is Eric Couture. He wrote a very interesting article about like all the different environmental threats that the soldiers face on the Dieppe beach that wasn't accounted for by the COHQ. And one of it was the sun. The COHQ didn't take into account what would be the position of the sun at the time the soldiers will land on the beach. So when they will land on the beach, the sun was directly on their face and it would just completely blind them, which doesn't help when you're in the face of battle.
Equally silhouette them perfectly for the German defenders who have the sun behind them.
Right? Exactly. Yes. Honestly, I haven't thought of that, but yeah, you're completely right. So with the Pebble Beach, with the sun, basically the raid, like I've mentioned, was just a complete failures in terms of planification. So from its initial stage, really, nothing truly ever worked. And I'm very simplifying everything in terms of for brevity's sake, but beyond sending soldiers and tanks on ship and beyond just covering them with air support, COHQ had pretty much nothing else planned for Dieppe in terms of the specifics, I'll say.
Oh my God.
Like I said, this other officers from different branches weren't barely talking to one another. They had like this general meeting where where Mountbatten will just basically like give them updates and different intel. Well, not intel. They didn't have any of those, but they will just they will just like give them general updates on the raid. But like the soldiers wouldn't talk to one another during these meetings, and outside of them, they will just completely ignore each other. And yeah, they didn't add anything. Like I said, it was just like, let's go to Dieppe. Let's just send everything that we can at Dieppe and hope for the best. COHQ didn't know the actual number of the German garrison. They didn't know what part of fortification they will be facing. They didn't know what the beach actually looked like. They just assumed, well, it's a beach in France. All the beaches in France looks the same, right? Well, no, clearly not. Actually, very famously, the COHQ was relying on old postcards of Dieppe to learn its layout and to learn what it looked like. And clearly they didn't check the fucking postcards if they didn't know it was a Pebble Beach,
As one does. One always checks the postcards to see, where you're going. So.
And I was this is the part where I'm getting like worked up because for me, like this is the most frustrating thing about the Dieppe raid is that there was a lot of mistakes that could have been prevented that they just didn't do. And like I'm not a military expert in terms of like I'm not a military officer or whatever, but even for the layperson that I am, it feels like a lot of them could have been prevented.
This is basic. It's basic planning.
It's just basic common sense. Like I said, I'm getting worked up right now. So we're talking about the Yukon exercise, right?
Yeah.
And both Yukon exercises didn't go well. The first one was just atrocious. I think like all the ships got stranded. None of them reached their objective. It just didn't go well at all. And the second one was just marginally better. Like it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't really, really amazing. The Dieppe raid was supposed to happen in July 1942. It was at the time known as Operation Jubilee. And actually, it was it got canceled at the very last minute. So the soldiers were on the ships. They were on their way to France. And then, some of them got spotted by the German Navy or the German aircraft. Anyway, by the Germans. They got shot and then they went back to Britain because they deemed that the meteorological conditions were not there yet for a landing. Right. So this could have been that. But Mountbatten was really adamant that the raid should happen no matter what. And despite the COHQ advice to be like, we should just change location. The Germans know we're planning something. The German knows we're going to attack, we might attack France or just Dieppe in general. Mountbatten decided to conduct the raid anyway 1 month later because in its logic, and I'm not kidding, he thought that the German wouldn't suspect that the Allies will attempt the same operation again in the same location. They said like, the German doesn't think that we're that stupid to attempt the same operation at the same place. Let's just do it. And that's what happened, Oh
my God, it's that sort of thing. It was, they don't think we're that stupid. Let's prove them wrong. We are that stupid.
Exactly. Honestly, Frustrating.
Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. So this is where it gets very dark. And I think for Canadians who are familiar with the story of Dieppe, it hits especially hard because you have these superbly trained troops, eager to go. And Canadian soldiers have always been seen as a spearhead, the reputation that they forged in the First World War in fire. And this new generation is very much up to the standard. And instead, they're thrown like into the lion's den, really. It's an absolute massacre.
Yes.
Pinned against a low wall on Blue Beach when they managed to get out onto it. The tanks were becoming stationary shields rather than mobile fire support. So that means they're also drawing fire. What chance do you have?
And that's something I really wanted to highlight is that the Dieppe raid was not a failure on the soldiers' part. The soldiers did the very best that they could. And as you mentioned, they were supremely well trained, well, as best as they could for the raid. They were well equipped. They were eager to fight. It was a failure on planification and on DC HQ's part. The soldiers, when they landed on Dieppe, were basically fish in a barrel. Because of the lack of intelligence in both sense of the terms, COHQ had no idea what the German defense looked like. Like, I'm not a military strategist, as I mentioned, but like a basic rule of warfare, I play Age of Empires. So like I know the basic rule of warfare is if you plan an assault, you need more soldiers than the defenders. I think like the basic rule, like 3-1, like 3 assault, 3 attackers for 1
The traditional,
yeah.
10-1's even better if you can do it.
Yes.
Well, that was the plan at the beginning because they sent 10,000 allied soldiers to Dieppe. And at the time, they thought there would be like something like 1,500 German defenders.
Based on their amazing intelligence picture they had?
Based on their amazing intelligence, but basically...
On those sandy beaches.
On the sandy beaches, yes. Yeah. Well, instead of 1,500, there were actually 6,000 German defenders.
Ooh, that's a big difference.
Yes. So they had a quadruple of troops like to defend Dieppe. They didn't know that recently, before the raid, the Germans just upgraded their defense of the region. I think they built like some kind of like tunnel system between like one position to the other, which really helped them in protecting from air strikes, but also move from one target to the other, one position to the other. And I mentioned this before the recording, but right out of this recording, I got friends of mine that works with the Vimy Foundation, which I think 2 days ago they were at Dieppe, and they they send me pictures of like the beach and stuff, and you see just from their pictures on social media, which was probably better than the postcard that the COHQ had at the time. It's really frightening to imagine like a battle took place there because on the pebble beach, all around it, you got these stone relief. I don't know what's the proper words in English, but like that just surrounds the entire beach and just basically makes it like a complete death trap for anybody who just land there. Like on these stone relief, you had bunkers, you had pillboxes, barbed wire, machine gun nests all over them. So
they're cliffs.
In other words,
cliffs that are a couple of 100 feet high and have a very commanding view of the entire beach. They're on both sides and can fire down the entire length of the beach. As I said, I've been there, and the first thing that struck me as I walked down to the beach and looked back towards the town, you can look to your left, look to your right, you see these cliffs and the pillboxes, and you're going, who the fuck thought this was a good idea?
There we go. No, exactly.
Perfect for enfilade fire.
Perfect for enfilade fire. It's a textbook enfilade fire.
I remember like when I read like testimonials from soldiers, like they felt like the Canadian soldiers who were stuck on the beach. They felt like I could just see those German just like taking the time to pick their target and shoot.
Oh yeah.
I know it was just so like it was a piece of cake for them, which is.
I'm actually surprised more that any Canadians got off the beach, quite frankly.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Honestly,
if anything, I would have scheduled some remedial marksmanship training for those Germans because they shouldn't have missed.
Oh, yeah, shouldn't have. Well, yeah, and you've got the MG42 setting up their kill zones on either side. My God, all you have to do is just press the trigger.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said, Rejoy, like this was a complete massacre. So the men were exposed to enemy fire and any fire support from the aircraft, from the ships or from anywhere else, from the tanks. It was just like non-existent. Communication also collapsed at some point, which really aggravated the casualties that the Allied troops, Canadians and British, suffered. So after the first wave landed, there was some miscommunication that was that's still not really explained like what happened, like how it happened. But apparently HQ heard that the beach was captured after the first wave, which the first wave was just being completely massacred on the beach.
Massacred, captured. They sound
boots on the ground. Boots on the ground.
Lots of R's and D's.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're not moving, but they're there. So
they're there.
That means we've captured it. Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
So they ordered to send the second wave. And the second wave, which was part of which the FMR was part of, but also like other Canadian units were part of, honestly just didn't help. They just landed on the beach, and that's like the first wave. They just also got, unfortunately, mowed down by the Germans. And on top of all of that, the Allies also limited themselves in their naval and air supports. So artillery strikes, bombardment, air strikes, anything like that could have been more intensive to undermine the German defenses, but the Allies didn't want to destroy the city and arm its inhabitants, which is, honestly, I can't really argue against that. I can understand why. Because but I feel like this decision was done for political reasons. Because, like I said, the Dieppe raid was supposed to be like this grandiose show of force from Britain. Also to show to everyone, including the French, that like, hey, we're still fighting and we're fighting for you. We're going to liberate you guys sooner rather than later. So you can just like undermine this by just destroying the city, which, like I said, I cannot really argue against.
Yeah,
but
to be fair, a little bit more targeted, particularly with naval gunfire, which is pretty accurate. They could have absolutely targeted the main areas that were providing the fire. You didn't have to level the town. The town is low down. If you're fighting from within the town, you're not doing much to the beach. It's the high ground that rings the town that they could have put a lot more precise fire on.
Well, I think those sentiments definitely were not there on D-Day. Couple of years later, where they leveled,
or any of the strategic bombing that we talked about.
That's right, exactly, yeah. So interesting, the thing is, it's really interesting in the sense that why choose Dieppe of all the places you can insert a surgical strike?
Yeah,
what made Dieppe so important for Mountbatten to say that's the spot we're going to go, that's what we're going to take?
B2B.
And that, folks, is why you tune into the Rum Ration podcast for such historical insight and analysis as Julien Lehoux saying, beats me.
Thanks for joining us today. That wraps it up.
Who fucking knows is another way of looking at it.
No, but like more seriously, like the British government wanted to strike a French port, as they are important location in terms of strategy and intel and stuff like that. And they knew like if they were gonna invade France to liberate it from the German, they're gonna start with a French port. For them was just like a logical choice.
Right. Okay.
And as I mentioned before, the idea was also to prepare for a larger scale invasion of France. So not just with soldiers, but also with tanks. So just picking and choosing whatever part was large enough to welcome, to welcome, in quotation mark, to accommodate, thank you. Accommodate both soldiers and tanks. They just chose Dieppe because it was just like a large beach. It was a French port. It was also a larger beach just to accommodate the tanks.
Had a good casino. Had been a very popular.
It did have a good casino.
Yeah. Tourist
there were probably somebody in the British government who went in vacation there, like in the 1930s or something. But it's honestly really that simple. Dieppe was a French port, and it was big enough to accommodate a larger scale assault force. That's it.
Wow.
And
vagaries of fate.
And honestly, as I said before, also, they saw Dieppe as a French port, and they just assumed that all French ports in this region were all similars. Like all Normandy beaches are similar to all Dieppe.
Of course.
Of course.
It's that
they all
simple.
look the same to me, right?
And since Habakkuk didn't work out so well,
that's right. Communications is critical here, though, folks, and this breakdown in communications is also not brought to you by Fog of War Wireless Gin, the premium military spirit for headquarters that would rather infer what is happening than receive any reliable information about it.
Distilled through smoke, static, and one dangerously optimistic wireless report. Every bottle delivers subtle notes of confusion, wishful thinking, and reinforcements dispatched to a breakthrough that does not exist.
Best enjoyed offshore, where the beach appears secure, the tanks appear mobile, and everything is proceeding more or less according to whichever report arrived last.
Fog of War Wireless Gin. When the signal is faint, simply increase the confidence.
Now available with our new floating reserve tonic. Be sure to commit the entire bottle before checking whether anyone ashore actually asked for it.
Well, that kind of sums it all up, doesn't it?
Kind of does.
So in the middle of this chaos, where the plan is completely evaporated, and Colin, I think that's a great word that you use there, evaporated, because that's what happened. That's what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all been trained to say, along the lines of the whole plan goes out the window as soon as you hit the ground type of thing. But this is way beyond that, beyond it. Now we see the saving grace a little bit, if we can term it that.
Yeah.
Individuals who are stepping up to save what's left.
Yeah, and I think that's something that is very important to remember when we talk about this church battle. I think I've mentioned this before, but I'm a very cynical person in nature. And I think it's really easy for me to just be lost in the bigger picture and just see this battle as just this tragic defeat and just evaluate it and then just move on. But like when I do that myself, I know I'm also doing a disservice by not looking closer at some of the individual stories of the soldiers who took part in it and who just show intense act of bravery and heroism during this battle. Like in the face of adversity, a lot of them just perform heroic and very selfless act and Jerry conducted themselves with a lot of bravery. As I've said before, like this battle was not lost because of the soldiers that were deployed. It was lost for other higher reasons. And if there's a lesson to be learned from this event is that these individuals can do a lot to help their others despite very overwhelming odds against them.
Which brings us to guys like David Hart.
Yeah.
And like I'd said, David was a close friend of mine. Despite our very significant age gap, Hart, believe it or not, later became the longest serving officer in the Canadian Armed Forces history, serving in both active and honorary roles for 81 years.
Amazing.
He died in March 2019, aged 101, and we'd hosted his 100th birthday at the RMR Officers Mess the summer before. And he was a Montrealer. He was born in 1917 to a Jewish family, and he jumped at the chance to fight the Nazis. And on that morning of the 19th of August, 1942, he was offshore, on a ship that was being hammered by fire. Julien, tell the listeners what David did when he realized the regiments on Green Beach were about to be wiped out.
Yeah. So, David Hart was a signalman when his ship got a message to pull back from the raid. They had a planned hour when to pull back, and I think the issue sent the notice like an hour prior to this set hour. So Hart, however, saw that two units, the Saskatchewan Regiment and the Cameron Highlanders, were still fighting in Pourville, like Green Beach. Green Beach, that bitch, my God. I'm French. I don't know if you guys have noticed.
That's a different episode.
Yeah, that's the Green Beach.
That's on the Rum Ration OnlyFans.
Patreon exclusive.
That's right. Join our Patreon page and click on our OnlyFans link to watch Rejoy and I sipping gin or sipping rum, intently looking into the camera.
So they were stranded on the Green Beach. So I'm trying to work that up. Okay, so Hart broke communication with HQ. And they tried to reach them to warn them, because if they were to leave, they would just be left stranded on the beach because they didn't receive the order from HQ because they were fighting. And it's only after a lot of trials that he finally found very faint signals, and he successfully ordered their evacuation. So Hart didn't know it at the time, but I think he saved something like approximately over like 100 soldiers who heard his orders from retreat, and they just managed to successfully retreat from the beach. So, Colin, I'm sure you could tell more about it, but apparently he felt pretty good about it, which I can only assume.
He did feel pretty good about it. But he never bragged about it. And there's a really excellent painting in the RMR Officers Mess that had been the Molson family after World War II commissioned. I think it was 50 paintings or more of every regiment that had significant action in World War II. And for the Signals Regiment, it was a scene of Dave Hart on the radio set in a half-sinking ship offshore, calling in the messages that actually got those 100+ soldiers off the beach and lived because of that. But Dave was exceptional. He was also very dedicated to working. He was an accountant in his civilian life, and when I got appointed as honorary lieutenant colonel, I guess 2013, Dave would have been in his early 90s, and I remember calling him up It would have been about April when I got the letter from the Minister of Defense, and I called him up in April and asked him if I could buy him lunch to get some advice from him. And he'd been an honorary for close to 50 years. I'd love to learn from him. What could I do? What would be the best things to do? And he said, "Well, Colin, it's tax time, so could we have lunch like near my office, because it's a really busy period for me." Dude, you're 93.
He was still working. He was still doing tax for people.
Oh yeah. He was working
45,
50-hour weeks, except for tax time. It was like 80-hour weeks. He was
incredible
guy.
Yeah, honestly, very incredible, frankly. Yeah.
There are a couple of things there, Julien. You mentioned Dave Hart getting the message out to the troops who were fighting in Pourville. So this is one of the things, though, when you look into the history of the battle, the actual raid, troops did actually get off the beaches.
Oh yeah.
And they made it into Dieppe. They made it into Pourville, where they were fighting, and when they broke through, they broke through.
Yeah.
They, I think it was the Royal Regiment, Hamilton's Royal Regiment. They made it up to the casino in Dieppe, did they not? And they were isolated over there. So there's that idea that they weren't, despite all the odds against them, some troops managed to break out and get into the surrounding towns.
Yeah. We haven't talked about that, but like the main massacre was happened on White and Red Beach, but all the other beach, and I'm really careful how to pronounce that word right now. I'm very, very self-conscious right now.
We're not talking about white and red beaches. That's a different podcast altogether.
Yeah. That's our other podcast that we do only on Saturdays.
It's kind of like Bleu Nuit. It's only after 11 o'clock at night. Yeah.
This brings back memory, right? So,
oh dear.
All right.
Kind of like the raid. We're going off the rails.
Oh yeah, completely.
Oh yeah, the script is going out the window right now. Right? But but like the other beach, so like Reed and Blue, things were going slightly better than White and Red. White and Red was just like a complete massacre for a while. But yeah, I think like on Blue Beach, there was like the number 3 commando from the British Army, who was pretty much the only unit that managed to successfully fulfill his objective, which is really impressive. But elsewhere, we can also talk about Charles Merritt real quick, who was part of Pourville, which honestly I'm not sure if was he evacuated by David Hart. Is it possible that he was?
Merritt?
Yeah.
No. He stayed.
No, he was not. He stayed
because he was in the same area than when.
Yeah,
David
but
Hart
Merritt ended up being a prisoner of war.
Oh,
yeah,
I forgot. I should have known. Never mind then. Okay, but so Merritt was basically the commanding officer for the Saskatchewan Regiment, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. So Saskatchewan.
When he landed at Pourville, separating him and his position with his objective, which is Pourville, was like this bridge that was like, the only bridge available to cross the river to reach Pourville. And the bridge was just like being pinned, but not being pinned, but it was just being like targeted by the German army. And the soldiers are completely pinned from one side of the bridge to reach Pourville. So Merritt, very brazenly, just decided to cross the bridge and just be like, hey, look at this, guys. I'm just going to do it. So he just like crossed the bridge, did
through machine gun fire. Well,
true machine gun fire. Yeah, exactly. I'm saying this like it was easy. No, true machine gun fire. He just crossed the bridge, raised his helmet to show his soldiers, be like, hey, come on over, guys. This is easy. Like, it's no big deal. And honestly, I mean, some stuff are just honestly unbelievable. And then he just decided to proceed to cross the bridge 4 more times just to show how easy it was. And each time it will just bring over more soldiers. And this
something to be said about that prairie spirit,
Yeah. So yeah, and did that. And honestly, his soldier and him like managed to hold down Pourville for like a couple. I don't know how long, but they managed to hold down Pourville and fulfill their objective for a while. And they just had to retreat because there was German reinforcement that just basically chased them off. But for his action, honestly, very impressive action, Merritt received the Victoria Cross, which I think is like the one of the 16 Canadian soldiers in total who received the Victoria Cross for World War II.
I have to interject about his Victoria Cross and Merritt because he earned the Victoria Cross, of course, which we have an episode number 45 in our back catalog about the Victoria Cross. But over the years, one of the lines about Merritt that's always always sent shivers down my spine and made me
Yeah.
realize that I am probably never going to be nearly a 10th or 100th of the man that he is the final paragraph from his citation. And I'll read it out. Quote, although twice wounded, interjection here, probably because he kept walking across a bridge under fire. Although twice wounded, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt continued to direct the unit's operations with great vigor and determination, and while organizing withdrawal, he stalked a sniper with a Bren gun and silenced him. He then coolly gave orders for the departure and announced his intention to hold off and, quote, get even with the enemy, end quote. And this is the part that really gets me here. When last seen, he was collecting Bren and Tommy guns and preparing a defensive position which successfully covered the withdrawal from the beach. What's not written there is he was doing that by himself.
Yeah.
So he'd walked across that bridge waving his hat 4 times, attracting fire, telling his boys it's fine, gets them across, achieves his objective, then decides it's time to evacuate. He decides he's going to cover his troops. He stays behind. He's seen collecting all these weapons and telling them, have a good time. It's good. Don't worry. It's all fine. Like, holy crap. Talk about leader.
And he wants to get even with the enemy. Do not piss off those South Saskatchewan guys.
No, no. And he lived to a relatively ripe old age. He died in 2000. Oh.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Julien, there were others who also had some, were incredibly heroic. Tell us a little bit about Jean. I love this name. I love it. Jean-Napoleon Maurice. The FMR.
I like Jean-Napoleon Maurice because it's both really impressive but really not talked about a lot. And I say that because I feel like Jean-Napoleon Maurice's story is just really representative of how a lot of other nameless soldiers probably conducted themselves during the raid, but it was just not really told. So Jean-Napoleon Maurice was, as far as we know, he might have been like the only Black Canadian soldiers that was part of the Canadian Army during the raid. We know it was the only Black Canadian soldiers with the Fusiliers Mont-Royal at the time, probably for the entire Canadian Army that was deployed. And as far as we know, it was noted that during the Dieppe raid, he helped 4 soldiers that were injured, and he managed to somehow bring them back to safety so they could be shipped back to Britain. So during intensive enemy fire, he just saved 4 of his comrades. I think 3 Canadians and 1 British soldiers, and then successfully managed to retreat back to Britain after the raid.
Wow,
and
incredible.
Then after that, I know he was deployed in Italy, was injured in 1943, and then went back to Canada where he worked as a porter with a train station. But very, very impressive individual, honestly. And like I said, one of those guys that perform heroically, not for showing up, or just performing heroically despite overwhelming odds against them, and just did their jobs as best as they could. Yeah,
and we're talking a lot about it, and rightly so, individual acts of heroism by soldiers on the ground. But we haven't talked much about the naval element. But there was, there was a case of true heroism by the Navy as well, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, we talked about David Hart, but there was also one story that I really like is about the Polish Navy. I like this story for two reasons. Both because like Poland is obviously a very important actor in World War II. Everybody knows the Polish invasion of the from the German army and stuff like that. But we always tend to forget that Poland kept fighting all the way until the end of the war.
That's
There
right.
were like
Free
a lot,
Polish army. Yeah.
exactly, and which is so fascinating to read. The Polish army at the time.
Well, and RAF squadrons.
Yes. Yeah.
And the Navy part is completely overlooked. So it's interesting that you have an example here to tell us.
Yeah. So basically, I'm going to massacre its name. I'm really sorry. But the ORP Slazak was the Polish destroyer that was deployed in Dieppe. And at the moment, the destroyer's job was just basically to provide cover fire for the troops on the beach. And they had strict orders to not approach too near the beach to avoid enemy fire. But when order was called, the captain of the Slazak, again, Romuald Nadec Tymiński, I'm really sorry for massacring his name, decided to overlook orders and to approach his destroyers from the beach because he deemed that the men who were stranded on the beach were more important than the integrity of his ships. And I think he also kind of estimated that machine gun rifles will not sunk his ship, so he could just risk approaching his ship. So he just, like I said, gets hauled or approaches destroyed near the beach, and managed to save something like 85 Canadian soldiers who managed to just swim back.
Wow.
So super impressive on that regard. Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah,
and well, there was also Ménard. His action at the raid was also really impressive, was it not?
We have to talk about Ménard, of course, because Ménard was not just impressive in terms of like how he managed to shape his unit back for fighting shape, but also his participation in the raid. Like I said, just unbelievable stuff.
Yeah.
So when the ephemeral landed as part of the second wave, a lot of soldiers, as soon as they will jump from the landing craft, they will be immediately hit by machine gun fires. And Ménard was one of them. So as soon as he landed on the beach, he got shot once. And well, despite this, he just like rose back up and decided to proceed forward when he got hit by a second bullet. And then a third one.
Wow.
Still, despite being injured 3 times, he decided to just rally his troops, and they managed to finally capture the beach for the first time since the beginning of the invasion. So when they attempted to leave the beach to proceed to the next objective, which was the city of Dieppe, Ménard was hit a 4th time. But he still persevered, still rallied his troops, and still continued on when he was hit by a 5th bullet.
Tabarnak.
Wow.
Ouais, tabarnak, ça. That's the word. But like, he still wouldn't be put down. He was still on his 2 legs, still giving orders, still rallying his troops, still giving orders and everything. And then when retreat was called, he was still organized. I think at this point was held by the what's the word in English? The Aumônier,
Padre.
The padre, yeah, the padre of the
chaplain,
regiment
yeah.
was like helping him, was like supporting him. So like the 2 of them will just like rally the troops together, and they will just like organize the troop until the retreat, where he finally just lost consciousness from his injuries. 5 bullets, and you read his account of when he was hit. It's a big paragraph in French, which I'm not going to read. But it's just honestly really chilling, like the description of being hit by a bullet, how he felt at this moment, and how he just persevered on. I feel like, honestly, the guts on this man is just
Incredible.
like, you said, Colin, like you will never be like 100 of David Hart. I want to be 1,000 of Ménard or anybody else that was
Or
part of
Merritt.
these
I mean,
beach.
Or Merritt.
Oh,
Yeah.
Merritt.
so
Forget about
Merritt
it.
and Ménard, I mean, they're both commanding officers, an indication
Mhm.
of some serious kick-ass leadership that's going on there. I think it's important also for us I'm just going to point out the other units that participated, because if you're listening to this podcast, you probably think it's all Montreal show. It's all the Fusiliers Mont-Royal did everything by themselves, but it was actually much more. Well, I mean, we did mention the South Saskatchewan regiment there with Merritt, but it was a very Canadian operation. I mean, you had from Ontario, you had the Royal Regiment of Canada, you had the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, and the Essex, who are now the Essex and Kent Scottish Regiment. From Montreal or Quebec, you had the Fusiliers Mont-Royal. You also had the Black Watch, had 3 platoons were there. Also from out west, you had not just the South Saskatchewan Regiment, but you had the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders of Canada. I think, Rejoy, you remember your good buddy Brett Takeuchi?
Yes,
from
indeed.
Winnipeg.
Indeed.
You also had the Calgary Highlanders.
Yes.
And you had the Toronto Scottish Regiment is there as well, plus the 14th Armoured Regiment, which was a Calgary regiment from the Armoured. And you had some anti-aircraft regiment and also engineers, obviously, signals, ordnance, medical corps, all that stuff. So folks from right across the country all participated. I think it's important to kind of put that out there. Just to limit the amount of hate mail we're going to get.
Well, I misspoke earlier. It wasn't the Royal. It was the Royal Regiment of Canada. I said Royal Rifles. The Royal Regiment of Canada.
Right. Royal Rifles were at that time enjoying the hospitality of the Japanese Army. I believe.
That's right. That's right.
Julien has talked to us about before.
Yeah. Quite right. And the interesting thing about the Royal Regiment of Canada was they were completely wiped out in that raid. So they had to be reconstituted afterwards from the remainder of the battalion.
That's right.
And
it went on to have a great time in Normandy.
They did. Yikes. That's a whole different episode, which I think is worth covering later on. But you put that very well, Colin. It was it was a Canadian tragedy and a Canadian also perhaps display of strength in adversity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
it was- it was-
we're getting to the end. The survivors were either pulled off the beach and managed to get it back, either, as you pointed out, the protection from either a Polish destroyer or other Royal Navy vessels that were trying to do it. But those who couldn't be evacuated, these survivors were either pulled from the water where they were trying to escape, or they're just captured on the Pebble Beach itself. So for the 1,946 Canadians, the battle ended and they're still alive. But their struggle for survival in the prisoner of war camps is beginning.
There's this sentiment among prisoners of war from Europe or like in Hong Kong, in Asia, or anywhere, that their war was over when they got captured. And for them, this was also part of the evolution of Dieppe. I think it was Jacques Nadeau who basically described it that his war lasted for 15 minutes on the beach, then he got captured, and then the war was over. Like, if that's his sentiment, and if that's the sentiment of many other soldiers, I'm not going to argue against that. That's how they felt. That's how they felt. But for me, I take the liberty to disagree with that. I think their war very much continued when they were part of the POW, as POWs in camps. I think their war still continued, just took a different form.
Absolutely.
Indeed. So this is where we have to talk about, what's been termed the Krieges, Kriegsgefangene, the Gefangene, which is a German term of POWs, prisoners of war.
Yeah.
So Julien, they were crammed into cattle cars without food or water. How did they survive the years that followed?
Well, I'm going to tread carefully there because I'm obviously very influenced by how the Canadians were treated in Asia by the Japanese. So, I'm always a bit influenced by how they were treated by the Germans in comparison. So I'm going to tread carefully there to not whitewash their experience in German prisoners of war camps. But it's important to highlight that the POW experience in German prison camps were varied from one nation to the other. So to summarize, the Canadians were better treated than some of their other allied comrades in the same prison. So the Slavs, for example, the Russians or the Polish, or were subjected to forced labor or subject to various forms of abuse by the guards. It was very, let's just say it was very, very difficult for them. Not the same way that it was difficult for the Canadians. So in comparison, the Canadians were regularly fed. Not well fed, but they were still, regularly at the rations. They had doctors available for them, doctors from their own regiments that were also captured, but also German doctors if it was necessary. And their accommodation was not pleasant, was not nice, it was not comfortable in the slightest, but it was marginally better than what they could have suffered through if they were Slavs or part of another nation, or if they were under the Japanese. That's when I say that. And I'm treading carefully there because, like I said, it wasn't
great, but it could have been a lot worse.
Exactly. You said it perfectly. Yes. So, it wasn't pleasant, but, they still had it rough, basically. And Rejoy, as you mentioned, their transportation to the POW camps were just very atrocious. They were jammed in cattle cars for several days. They were transported to whatever camps could welcome them. They didn't have any water. They didn't have any food. They were just stuck in the train car, and they couldn't move under any circumstance. They couldn't just go out of it or anywhere. It was very, very, very awful. And the Canadian POWs, but also the British and also other soldiers that were captured in Dieppe were pretty much left on their own for this period. One thing that is really important to mention, though, is that the Dieppe raid, like I said, one of the objectives was to capture German POWs. And one of the instructions that they had when they would capture a German POW was to shackle them, to transport them back to Britain.
Handcuffs.
Right.
Handcuffs, yes. So,
which is against the Geneva Convention.
Yes. Yeah. And this plan this action was actually found by German soldiers after the Dieppe raid was over. Some officer had it written, he tried to bury it, but the Germans found it. And
the Brigadier William Wallace Southam, he had brought ashore a copy of the assault plan and then tried to bury it on the beach, but some Germans saw him.
Yeah, I don't know why he brought it, but whatever.
Yeah.
So in case you forgot,
maybe don't bring those things.
No, exactly.
Self-indicting.
Yes. And it gave some great cause because apparently Hitler himself was really infuriated when he learned about this instruction. He was really, really angry about it personally. So he ordered that all Canadian POWs will be handcuffs and shackles in German POW camps. And in retaliation, the Allies government and maybe Canada also decided to also handcuff German POW camps. And so there was like this big,
Tit for tat. Yeah.
exactly. And like I said, I'm just going ahead of myself for a bit there, but it just ended eventually. I think when the Allies government decided to unshackle the German prisoners of war because they figured out that if they just like keep retaliation further, the German army will just brutalize further the Canadian POW. So they just kind of ended. But for a while, I think for like several months, the Canadian POWs will be shackled in German camps. Every morning, guards will just come to their cells. They will just like handcuff them with first with ropes and then with chains, and they will just like leave it for the days. The chains, from what I saw, because I think like the FR Museum has some of these chains in exhibition, which is really cool. They were like the chains were quite long, so they would just still give them some kind of wide range of movement, which so it wasn't. I mean, it was super bothersome, obviously, and it was humiliating. It was like really aggravating for the wrist and stuff like that. So, like I said, I'm not saying it was easy, but it
could have been worse.
It could have been worse. And I say this, but like, it still sucked. But there were also like some of them soldiers. I read like apparently that some of the handcuffs were like kind of like they were kind of loose. So some of the soldiers could remove the shackles, remove the handcuffs, and just like go on their day with that, and like help all the other soldiers, their friends, like to just remove their own shackles. And then when the guards will come back, like whatever hour they will come back, they will just like put them back on, just for the guards to remove them like 3 seconds later. So it sucked. The whole ordeal was also very humiliating for them, but. No, I'm not gonna put any but in there. It just sucked. It just sucked. Yeah. But outside of this event, like the BOW biggest challenge in German prisoners of war camp was boredom. Fortunately, they were not partially brutalized by the guards. They were not subject to forced labor. So they were just like pretty much left alone in the camp, and they were just bored out of their minds. So they had to make do with whatever they could. So the POWs had liberties to organize different events to entertain themselves. They will do various art events. They will do theaters. They will do shows. They will do music events, stuff like that to really entertain themselves. But also very, very interesting how creative they will be. They will like manage to create their own costumes or craft their own instruments to entertain themselves, also entertain the guards, because the guards will also be bored, so they will check out the shows. So that was also very cool. But one of the things that was super important was sports, and mainly soccer. Soccer is super easy to play. You just need a ball and a very large terrain to just play on, and you're good to go. So across all camps, soccer was like super important for prisoners of war, because it's just like pretty much it was the only thing that they could do basically while they were there. I think it's at Stalag 4B that the camp had over 22 teams across all prisoners of war there. 22 teams is a lot of people. They will like organize tournaments. They will organize games. It was like such. I rambled, but it was really important for them. There was an anecdote that I really like, is that there was like a doctor who was a prisoner of the war himself. He was in the middle of an appointment with a patient, and then he saw through the window that his team was playing. So the doctor was like, "Hey, gotta leave. My team is playing, and he just like ran off to just to just play.
I'll come back for your appendix afterwards.
Yeah, I'll finish the surgery soon.
But didn't Sylvester Stallone and Michael Caine make a movie about that? Soccer in the prisoner of war camps?
Oh, I
It's
vaguely
possible.
remember something.
Yeah. Victory or Escape to Victory or something. Anyway.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
possible.
soccer was definitely important in the prisoner of war camps, that's for sure.
Yeah. One of the things also, when I did this research, I read the book, The Coldest Myths, British and Commonwealth Prisoners of War in Journey by Sir S.P. Mackenzie. And he wrote an entire chapters on practical jokes that the soldiers and that prisoners will play on the guards. And honestly, this chapter was so funny. There were so many moments that I just read that I just laughed out loud, because practical jokes was one of the way that the soldiers would use to entertain themselves during the imprisonment. And some of these jokes were honestly just so ridiculous. It's just so funny. Like one of them that I really like is that like a soldier will just go like along the wall, like to a place that seemingly was remote, but it was still in plain view of the guards. And he will just like dig a hole for like several minutes and just like bury the hole after and then just leave. And then he and his friend will just like look at the guards trying to dig up whatever that he buried. But it was nothing. He buried nothing. Or he would just bury some bullshit that he found. Like absolutely nothing. Some of them will also like pass around like codes, but like, it was just like complete gibberish. They will just like say it was just nothing. It was say, so like it's just looking at the guard trying to decipher the language that it will like pass, but it was not. One thing that I also found really funny was like a group of like 5 or 6 soldiers, I think, just like went to the courtyard, and they they pretend that they were like flying an imaginary plane for like several hours. They just like won't be the pilot, will be like the mechanics, and they would just like walk around and pretend like they were flying a plane, just so that the guards will look at them and be like, "These guys are crazy. Like, what's going on with them? Like, they lost their minds." It was just like basically making fun of the guards. There was one prank that is honestly very daring, and I'm sure like this guy could have faced serious consequence, but somehow didn't. He saw a guard walking around with his rifle on his back, and he just sneak up behind the guard and just like pull the trigger so the shot would just fire in the air. It's just like to surprise the guard. And
I'm sure it did surprise the guard.
I'm sure it surprised him. Apparently, the guard was just kind of like, "Oh, god damn it, just go away," Just
Hey, you're such a nuisance.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Imagine trying that with the Kamloops kid in the Japanese prison.
No, exactly. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, no, like in any other context, that this guy would have been severely reprimanded, to say the least. But like, no, it just anyway. I just want to say, basically, like I said, the Canadian POW experience in Germany was not great, but they still were. The guards were more lenient on them than in comparison to other people.
Say the Russians, for example.
Oh my God.
Say the Russian, or like if they were Jewish, there was a lot of Canadian Jewish. David Hart, for example. If David Hart hypothetically will have been captured, he will probably have been executed if they learned he was Jewish.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah.
Wow. Okay, so 1946, like 1,946 Canadians as prisoners, basically almost full three years basically before they would have been getting home. And when they finally came home, the narrative was already being spun about the Dieppe raid, right? So you got Mountbatten calling it a, quote, necessary failure to prepare for D-Day, as if it was like this grand master plan to, we knew D-Day was going to come up and we had to, test out some theories and defenses and figure it out.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there where basically that's a going narrative, isn't it? It was a rehearsal to learn. We learned the lesson, so to speak. But modern historians and Julien, the Je me souviens archives show a completely different story, don't they?
Yeah, well, there was an intense debate. Well, there's still an intense debate regarding if the Dieppe raid really helped in the planification of D-Day. And well, contrary to popular belief, history as a field is very far from objective. And every piece of historical materials that we produce, including this very podcast, holds a point of view.
Yeah, you got
so
white bitches, you got green bitches, you got red bitches. I think you even talked about blue bitches at one point.
Yeah.
Son of a bitch.
So you guys are not worried that your podcast is going to get like demonetized or something, right?
We're hoping for it.
Absolutely.
So what I produce our exhibit Courage and Chaos, which is available for free by booking on jemesouviens.org. I went personally with the point of view, because this is the point of view that I was the most convinced by, that the Dieppe raid did not help in the planification of Normandy. This was, like I said, the conclusion that I came up with after doing my research. And if you guys are interested to learn more about it, and I'm really talking up to our listeners out there, I would really suggest checking out Brian Loring Villa's book, Unauthorized Action, Mountbatten and the Dieppe Raid, which offers a very scathing review of the planification of the raid and its aftermath, and a very scathing review on Mountbatten as an individual, let's say. So it's been a while since I've read this book, but from what I remember, the gist of it is that whatever lessons that could be learned from the raid could have been learned at far lesser cost in human lives. Dieppe was indeed chosen in preparation for a larger scale assault in the future, which became eventually D-Day, but its failure prevented any useful lessons to be learned. We're just going right to the beginning. One of the reasons Dieppe was chosen is because it could acclimate the landing of tanks.
Right.
Well, it didn't. The tanks just got stuck in the beach, and
Right.
there was nothing to be done with that. So what lesson is there to learn about that? Just use sand beach? They thought it was a sand beach. So anyway. And according to Lauren Villas, whatever possible legacy that Dieppe has is basically the result of a big media job from its main organizer, Lord Louis Mountbatten. So apparently Mountbatten was very, very quick to spin this tragedy as a lesson to be learned in the future. So before D-Day happened, Mountbatten was in the media saying like, well, it was a failure, but it's going to be useful in the future.
Right.
When Sicily happened in 1943, he said, well, I'm sure Dieppe was useful for that. It wasn't.
You're welcome.
In Italy, he said the same thing. It didn't work. So when D-Day happened in France, he said it happened. It successfully happened because I'm sure they used Dieppe, which they didn't really use. The planners for D-Day obviously read the reports on Dieppe, and they just said, well, okay.
We're not having Mountbatten on the planning committee. First one.
Lessons to learn, like not use Mountbatten, just move on. And I think basically this media job really modeled a lot of its legacy in general, but also more so in Quebec. If people are going to complain that we're too Quebec-centric or too Montreal-centric, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to go there again, on that well again. But we've talked about this a lot in the last episode I was on, like a couple of episodes ago, so I won't repeat it there. If you guys want to learn what I said, just listen to this episode. If you don't want to learn what I said, just don't listen to it then. But the tragedy of Dieppe really affected how the war was perceived in Quebec. So because of how the FMR was basically sentenced to their deaths as part of this failed second wave, this really affected the view of how French-Canadian troops were treated in the Canadian Army. I think I've mentioned this in the last episode, but I have very vivid memories of when I was a kid and starting to learn about World War and Canadian military history and stuff like that, that it was regular that French-Canadian troops were used as cannon fodder for the English comrades, which is obviously not true. But I don't know. I had this memory of learning about this, and I knew I was not alone. I knew, like, when I was talking about this to other people, other Quebecois people, this was well known. Like, of course, we were cannon fodder for the English. And this is a vision that somehow still exists today. In 2024, during a conference at the University of Montreal, the chief of the Parti Québécois, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, reiterated the myth that the Canadian Army will use French-Canadian as cannon fodder, not during Dieppe, but during Normandy. And I think that this vision of basically just this imaginary of a beach, a French beach, with troops just running to automatic rifles, is coming really mostly from Dieppe, for Quebec at least. And we know this is factually false in terms of like the Canadians being used as cannon fodder from Normandy. The Canadians were part of the second wave of Normandy. Like the beach was not actually clear, but like it was pretty much clear when they got there. But I feel like this echoes directly to this particular heritage of Dieppe in Quebec. So I don't think that Dieppe is not partially learned about it in Quebec. It's cool we just don't talk about the Second World War in general. But like in general, we're going to talk about Dieppe. We're going to learn about Dieppe in Quebec, but we're not going to know it's from Dieppe. We're going to learn this experience of the Canadian soldiers without really associating it from the actual event that it happened from. So I think there's a lot of discourse surrounding Dieppe, and I think there's a lot of emotions involved as well, which I think muddies how we can study this event. So my objective when I did this exhibit, Courage and Chaos, which again, it's available on jeuxvivier.org for free, just book it, is really trying to make sense of everything surrounding this event and just present it as succinctly as possible to make it more understandable. So as much as possible, and you listen to this episode, you know that I got worked up, I got frustrated, I laughed a lot. There's a lot of emotions involved with this event, but I try to just remove this emotion and just present the facts from what I perceive, at least.
Yeah.
That's some great points about the political exploitation of history. And Rejoy and I, all kidding aside, we do our level best to avoid politics on the Rum Ration podcast. And we like your suggestion. We are going to branch out into the OnlyFans side and just talk about white bitches, red bitches, blue bitches. I think there's a serious monetization path for us there.
Of course, yeah.
All kidding aside, learning to separate fact from fiction in political discourse, it's awfully tricky, right? And
it's really difficult, yeah.
How does Canada Company's military history learning program help students analyze the Dieppe raid, through media literacy?
Well, as I mentioned, the Dieppe Basin issue is just highly controversial and just provoke a lot of discussion by both contemporaries at the time, but also by historians today.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, a lot was written about it, and it's really difficult to navigate through all of that. So with this module, the exhibit, we have different set of activities that students can do in classes after checking out the exhibit. And one of the things that was really important for us, because I was not all working on it, we also had a great team that worked with us, Marina, Chantal, and everybody else, was to help students develop their critical analysis skill. So we have different activities where we have them read different primary and secondary sources on different topics related to the raid. So one of our activities, for example, that was conceived by a friend of the show, Chantal Clairborg, was called Guilty or Not. And we have students read different excerpts from different sources and then have them discuss if they believe that Lord Louis Mountbatten is the sole responsible for this tragedy. There is no right or wrong answer to this activity. I think just the point of it is basically have them study a subject, have them form their own opinion, and just have them debate it, and just have it defended, just build arguments surrounding their own opinions. I think that these are skills that are not only useful when studying history, but also just skills that are useful in general in life.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful idea. And Julien, what can listeners do to support the mission of Canada Company today?
Well, donations are always welcome. But for us, more importantly, just check out our programs. So out of the military history program, which JMCB is part of, we also have honorary bravery in Ontario. So if you're listening from elsewhere in Canada, we have honorary bravery that provides the same resources that we do, but adapted for the different school, the different curriculum from different province. There's also Canada Company also has a lot of bursary program and live events for members of the military, for veterans, but also for their families. So if people are interested, they can check out their website to just learn more about these events and how they can be involved with Canada Company. For JMSV specifically, as I mentioned, we have a lot of free materials available for classroom. So if you're a teacher, feel free to check them out. There's no accounts are necessary to be made. There's no paywall. There's nothing. They're just free. They're there. Click on it. There's no trap. They're just available. You can also check us out on the social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. We provide also a lot of historical content that are not necessarily related for the classroom, just for if you're interested in history and Canadian and Quebec history, we have a lot of content that we created, not just me. So if you don't like me, that's okay. There's also a lot of historians that we hire to create very interesting content. We got our exhibit, our blogs, and everything. So check us out.
Well, thanks so much. Thank you very much for coming back on the Rum Ration podcast, Julien.
Yes.
It was a pleasure. It was super fun.
And hopefully this episode will earn us some points with Sarah and Vary, who always likes to point out that we need to remember the contribution of the signals. Now, before we wrap up this episode, I believe it is time for me to insert some obscure reference to the RMR and Dieppe.
Yeah. Oh my goodness me. What tenuous connection have you found this time, Colin?
Not just one, Rejoy, not just one, but two. Two, in fact. Not merely one tenuous connection, but two of them. The first is relatively easy, because after the Dieppe raid, when the 2nd Canadian Division was licking its wounds and being reorganized, none other than the RMR's very own Victor Whitehead was placed in temporary command of the division, the 2nd Division, to get them back in shape, taking over from Major General Roberts, who got the DSO after the raid, believe it or not, and was sent on to other actions. So Brigadier Whitehead served for approximately 4 months in 1942 after the raid as the acting general officer commanding 2nd Canadian Infantry Division. During that difficult period when the division was being reorganized and refitted after the heavy losses suffered in the raid on Dieppe. Now, Victor Whitehead had served with his brother in the RMR during the First World War, although sadly his brother Edward Whitehead, who was a captain, was killed on June 3rd, 1916, during the Battle of Mount Sorel, which was the single day that saw the most RMRs killed, with 119 killed in action before lunch. In memory of her son, Mrs. E.A. Whitehead donated the regiment's first set of colors, which is the King's color and the regimental color. And after the war, Victor was heavily involved in the armory's planning, financing, and construction. We, of course, have an episode on that, episode number 27.
Yes.
Victor Whitehead also commanded the regiment in the 1930s, and then again after the war broke out in 1940, before he was promoted to brigadier to command the 5th Canadian Infantry Brigade.
Well, I got to admit it, not that tenuous, I suppose. I had feared worse.
Thank you.
But,
Thank you.
I was expecting, a dog who was kitted out as a mascot for a platoon. But this is good. But for all of Victor Whitehead's glorious and dedicated service to King, country, and regiment, he was never actually at Pebble Beach at Dieppe, was he?
Well, not exactly at Dieppe. No.
Well.
So if you're going to get all geographically picky about things, allow me to introduce you to Lieutenant, later Captain Charles Edmond Guillet of Marieville, Quebec. And shout out to my brother Kevin, who's worked at the Marieville Fire Department as a fire inspector. I'm just pulling out all the references here.
The links get more and more tenuous.
I do. Now, Kevin's not been to Dieppe. But Charles Guillet not only visited Dieppe, actually, I think Kevin has. He was there during World War II.
Oh, that's all you got?
No, of course not. It gets better.
No, of course
In
not.
June 1944, Lieutenant Guillet was assigned to the newly formed No. 9 Canadian Defence and Employment Platoon, RMR, where he was responsible for arranging, billeting, and feeding for the unit's advance party. And on September 2nd, 1944, Lieutenant Guillet led a special detachment from his platoon to Dieppe. Now, this mission was highly significant as it allowed this detachment of RMR soldiers to witness the historic, victorious return of the 2nd Canadian Division to the city, 2 years after the division had suffered heavy losses during the failed 1942 raid. And that was done on purpose. They were pulled out of their Normandy campaign line of march and sent over to Dieppe so they could kind of, heal some wounds. And the Royal Regiment of Canada, who you mentioned had been completely wiped out, were fully reconstituted and were part of that liberation.
Okay, now that is quite something. That is a solid reference. So he and some other RMRs were actually in Dieppe, albeit, 2 years after the raid, but they were there.
They were there, and precisely. And due to the remarkable humanitarian nature of which all RMRs are blessed. I mean, Rejoy,
Of course,
anyone,
yes.
I think,
Yes.
exemplifies that best.
Yes.
While he was stationed in Dieppe, Guillet's RMR detachment, they hosted a dance for local French civilians on September 17th, 1944.
And you know how much I love a dance, don't you, Colin?
You do.
I do.
You do. And like all lonely soldiers like you to get to know the locals. Regimental records note that this is the first dance many of the civilians had attended since the German occupation began in 1940. I think, what a lovely, selfless gesture for Lieutenant Guillet and his men to invite the local young women to a social gathering. And
Very
I'm sure,
RMR. Yes.
It's very RMR. And I'm sure the dancing was strictly chaperoned.
Of course. Of course. What happened? Yes.
Yeah,
All right.
of
My
course.
last
Yeah.
tenuous fun fact about Guillet and Marieville. His uncle, Louis, served in the RMR during the First World War, also as an officer. But I can't find any evidence of him having visited Dieppe.
Well, before we dive into yet another rabbit hole and get very deep, I think that's it for this episode of the Rum Ration podcast. So please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell a friend. Heck, tell random strangers, and why not make it awkward? Stare into their soul until they've subscribed, and please leave a comment. We love the feedback, and it really helps us get found by others out there.
And please be sure to check out Julien's excellent work at the Canada Company's Military History Learning Program. You can find the Dieppe exhibition at www.jemesouviens.org.
And be sure to tune in for our next episode, which will be about, a truck.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe
Oh.
not. Yeah, you can't wait, can you, Julien?
I'm at the edge of my seat.
Okay, well, maybe it's not as dramatic as a Dieppe raid, but
Just you wait.
Yes, it's not just any truck. We'll be talking about the Canadian military pattern truck with none other than the honorary colonel of the RMR. There. We got our third RMR reference in. So until next time,
Cheers to history.
cheers to history.